welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and I am honored to have back with us today Bryan Fischer. He is the Director of Issues Analysis for Government and Public Policy at American Family Association. We've had Bryan on before, and I really appreciate this man's work and his passion for what he does. And today we're talking about something that I think you're going to find to be pretty impacting, and that is that the American Psychiatric Association now classifies pedophilia, yes, pedophilia, as a sexual orientation. What does this mean? What does this mean, and how will it impact us, and especially organizations, faith organizations across the country? Bryan, nice to have you with us. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Perry, and it's always good to be with you. Thank you for having me back on. And I just want to begin. You'll notice if you're watching on Skype that I've got my Stanford University lanyard around my neck here. You know, and actually, when I was ready to come on air, I took it off because I thought, well, that'll be a distraction. I said no. So it's back on. I just want to extend a word of kind of sympathy and condolences to all of my friends in Oregon.
Well, you know, I have to tell you that even our sports announcer said that it would be Oregon by 3, and it ended up being Stanford by 6, so he was a loser by 9.
Well, I'm telling you, I watched that whole game stem to stern, and I got really worried there in the fourth quarter, you know, when Oregon staged the comeback and returned block punt. So that's a quality team, and we were nervous right till the final whistle. We were lucky to escape with that one.
Well, I have to tell you, I knew we were in trouble when in the first quarter, we got the ball to the end zone and couldn't get it in twice. And I thought, uh-oh, this is going to be a hard night. And it was. Well, congratulations to you. You can gloat in it all you want.
Well, thank you. Well, and you've turned our attention to what I think is a critically important topic, Perry. And this is just kind of an amazing thing when you think about it. To give a quick snapshot of what goes on here, the American Psychiatric Association, they produce what's called the Diagnostic Manual, the DSM for short, and they produce this thing every 10 years. And this is treated by those that are in the psychiatric profession as virtually the Bible of psychiatric disorders and mental and emotional health. So it's very authoritative. It's consulted by psychotherapists and psychiatrists and psychologists all over the United States. Yeah. And they produce an updated version of this thing once every 10 years. So 10 years ago was the last time a new edition was produced. This is their updated version. This is the DSM-5. This is the 5th iteration of this diagnostic manual. And in the print version of the DSM-5, the latest one that they spent 10 years revising, it identifies pedophilia not as a mental or sexual disorder, but as simply a sexual orientation. That's what's in the print version of the manual. Now, when we here at the AFA, when we found out about this, we issued a statement, we issued a press release as soon as we found out about it, that the APA is now reclassifying pedophilia as a sexual orientation. Well, the APA immediately began to scramble and go into retreat mode, and they said, no, that's just a typo. What we meant to say is it's simply a sexual interest. Well, even sexual interest is different than a sexual disorder. Interest is very neutral. You can be interested in a lot of things. You can be interested in collecting butterflies. You can be interested in golf. It's a very neutral term, where the term disorder indicates, look, there's something fundamentally wrong here with the thinking pattern and behavior pattern. Now, they have pledged that they are, in the next print version of the DSM-5, that they're going to correct that. They're going to change it from orientation to sexual interest. That's still not adequate for the reasons that I just mentioned. But I have to say, Perry, I just do not think this is accidental. If you spend 10 years working on something, they know that this section of the DSM is the most controversial part. A lot of care, every decision, all the wording there, very deliberate. I just don't think it stretches credulity to think that this was just a typo. It was just an accident. And you can see a progression. Perhaps we can get to that, but you can see a progression in what the APA has done with pedophilia, where they have gradually relaxed the psychiatric standards on this particular condition, and now I believe they're on the verge. I think they did, and they would have left it there if we hadn't called them out on it. Now they're trying to scramble back because they realize the American people are not ready to accept pedophilia as something that is a normal alternative to heterosexuality. So we called them out on it. They're beginning to backpedal, but we're not satisfied that they're going far enough.
Well, if they take the word or the classification disorder away from pedophilia, then it certainly opens the door. Isn't this somewhat, Bryan, a quantum leap? I really thought what would happen with all of the attention towards same-sex marriages, that the next move would be polygamy, not pedophilia. So they've jumped over into a category maybe to get the shock and awe over and then gradually integrate it in. Because if they don't create it or classify it as a disorder, then you and I both know where that's going.
Well, that's exactly right. And I do believe that this was their agenda here, was to do this by subterfuge, to slip this in the DSM. I mean, that thing is a huge thing. I mean, that is one of the thickest books you're ever going to see. It's hundreds of pages. And I think they were hoping they were going to slip this thing in here. Well, it's actually thousands of pages. Slip this thing in here, hope nobody will notice. And then if it surfaces in a year or two, they could always say, hell, we did that a long time ago. That's old news. And then it's in there because it's in the print version. And the reality is, you know, Perry, it's still in the print versions. I mean, psychiatrists, mental health professionals, they get updated versions when they come out. This is what's on their shelves right now. You know, and you're right. I think they just try to jump right past polygamy, right past polyamory, and get right to calling pedophilia something that's innocent. I mean, their argument now is going to be that people are born this way. This is very, very dangerous because this is actually, this defense, pedophiles have actually used this in court cases, one in Canada and one in Florida. They haven't been successful with it, but they've actually used in court the defense that this is my sexual orientation. This is the way I was born. There isn't anything I can do about it. You really can't blame me for this because this is the way that I was born. So if this gets the official sanction of the American Psychiatric Association, then that is going to strengthen their case in court. They can say, well, this is not just my personal opinion. This is now the leading psychiatric authority in the country is saying the same thing. So it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous.
All right. In some ways, they're winning the war because you and I are now discussing this. And the more that it's publicly discussed and the shock of it is minimized, then it becomes the area of discussion publicly and socially and politically and everything else. And before you know it, it's common.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly the strategy that homosexual activists pursued with homosexuality. I mean, they outlined their strategy, and one of their strategies was just talk about it. Talk about homosexuality all the time. Mm-hmm. Don't let people think about the behavior itself, because that'll turn people off. But just talk about it all the time. Get it in ordinary conversations. Use that term over and over again because it desensitizes people to it. If they hear it often enough, then like you're saying, they begin to think of it as something, well, that's just a normal part of conversation. And then it's not long before they're starting thinking, well, that's a normal behavior. That's a normal sexual orientation. So it's very deliberate on their part to kind of desensitize the American public to this issue.
Well, part of that desensitization is children. Children are going to hear this topic, hear this discussion, and say, what is it? And then they're going to be told. What do we do with that?
Yeah. Well, and you know, when you start thinking about the implication for school settings and so forth, if this becomes accepted, you know, we have this Employment Non-Discrimination Act bill that was voted on by the Senate this week. It's being sent over to the House now. And that would prohibit any kind of discrimination against anyone based on sexual orientation. Yeah. Well, you can begin to see where this is going to go, Perry, because if this gets classified as a sexual orientation, then businesses, schools, daycare centers would not be allowed to discriminate against somebody who even admits that they're a pedophile. They can say, look, I've never acted on this desire, but this is the kind of sexual interest that I have. And a daycare center could not refuse to hire that person on that basis. So you can begin to see some of the incredible risks this is going to represent toward children all across the United States.
If the APA does take the word disorder away from pedophilia, what's left of their credibility?
Well, I think the reality is, you know, they capitulated on homosexuality in 1973. Up until 1973, homosexuality was listed in the DSM as a disorder, as a mental and sexual disorder. There was something fundamentally disordered about those that were attracted to homosexual behavior. And so it was considered something that was not normal. It was something that required treatment. It required therapy. And that, yet because of political pressure, not even because mental health professionals agreed with them, most mental health professionals, a year after that change was made, about 68% of mental health professionals said this is a mistake. We still believe that these people are disordered. They need help. They need corrective therapy. So it was a purely political move. It was political pressure. It was done not for scientific reasons, but for political reasons. And now we're seeing that same kind of dynamic with the APA. And I think your point's a good one. You know, if the APA capitulates on this, then I don't see why anybody should give them any credibility whatsoever.
All right, I got to take a break here, Brian. When I come back, I want to get onto a little bit what happened yesterday in the Senate. As you know, you just mentioned it. They did pass that discrimination bill. It goes over to the House. I don't know if the average American or even faith-based organization understands what this could mean if this thing sees the light of day. So we'll be right back. Bryan Fischer is with us today, and Director of Issues Analysis for Government Public Policy there at American Family Association. And let me encourage you to support this organization. AFA.net is their website. And boy, what a resourceful organization they are. Brian, we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
All right, we're back with really one of our colleagues in this industry. Bryan Fischer is with us today. He hosts his own show, Focal Point. Focus Today, Focal Point. We have
a theme working here.
I don't necessarily promote other guys, but I promote this guy a lot. He does a great job, and he's on the American Family Radio Network, and let me encourage you to check it out. We should probably put your show on theDove and just get it over with, Brian.
Well, that's kind of you. Appreciate that.
No, I really value and appreciate what you do. All right, we're talking about the fact that the American Psychiatric Association is now seriously considering classifying pedophilia as an orientation and not a disorder. And they blew the whistle on it, AFA did, and now they're considering it to be just an interest, right?
Yeah, they have removed the word disorder, even in their correction. They're no longer classifying it as a sexual disorder. It is now a sexual interest. And again, that's a very neutral term, nothing pejorative about interest, because you can be interested in a lot of innocent things. So we don't even believe that that's an acceptable alternative. And one other point I'll mention, Perry, before we move on, I'm looking at a piece here published by the Harvard Medical School back in 2010. It's a 2-page piece, and 3 times in here they describe pedophilia as a sexual orientation. So this is Harvard Medical School. This is 2010. This is why I think the APA is going to go this direction. They're going to go the full-blown sexual orientation approach, because Harvard Medical School has already given them permission to do it.
What does this mean to sex education, Brian? If it sees the light of day, if disorder is taken away from this classification, and even if it's interest, it doesn't really get classified as an orientation, eventually it would head that way. But if it's just considered an interest, does it show up in the textbooks?
Well, it would have to. It would be forced in there by homosexual activists and by pedophilia activists. You know, and right now we already know that sex education in as early as kindergarten is being done to desensitize elementary school children to homosexuality. They're being taught that it's perfectly normal to have 2 moms instead of a mom and a dad, or to have 2 dads instead of a mom and a dad. Again, that's a way of normalizing behavior that we believe is non-normative sexual behavior. The same thing will have to happen with pedophilia, or these textbook publishers or these schools would be sued for not telling the truth about sexual orientation. So it's very, very dangerous.
Wow. All right. Yesterday, the Senate did pass the discrimination bill, and it heads now to the House. And it basically says that you cannot discriminate in hiring on somebody's sexual orientation. and there was no provision in there, from what I can see so far, that would exclude faith-based organizations. I mean, this is the camel's nose under the tent.
Well, this may be the whole camel inside the tent. And your point is well taken, Perry. There is some kind of very flimsy religious exemption in there, but it applies only to churches and to institutions that are actually run and under the authority of a church. So an organization like the American Family Association, for instance, or like KDOVE would not have any protection whatsoever under this legislation. And it prohibits any kind of discrimination, any kind of, you can't include sexual orientation or gender identity disorder. That's still a disorder, according to the American Psychiatric Association. A man that wants to cross-dress, who thinks he's trapped inside a woman's body, that's still a disorder, according to the DSM. But you would not be allowed, even though you were a Christian business owner, it's a private business, it's not a religious, it's not a ministry thing, you just are a Christian businessman, you have a business that you want to run according to Christian principles, according to Judeo-Christian values, and if you did not want to hire a cross-dresser, if you advertised, for instance, that you had a position you wanted to fill, a cashier at a Christian bookstore, let's say, and a cross-dresser showed up to apply for that job, you could not turn him down because he was a cross-dresser, or you would face a lawsuit that could put you completely out of business. So the way this thing shreds the First Amendment, it strips all values-driven businessmen in America of their religious liberty protections, of their freedom of speech. They would not even be able to say that they think there's something non-normative about homosexuality or cross-dressing. Even if they said that, they could be subject to a lawsuit. Their freedom of press would go away. They couldn't even write a letter to the editor or publish anything in their personnel policy that would indicate this is an important issue for them in the organization. So it would expose every values-driven businessman in the country to a career and business-ending lawsuit. It's a horrible piece of legislation.
Well, I'm sad to say that one of Oregon's senators, Jeff Merkley, is one of the champions of this bill that was in the White House yesterday with the president over this, trying to broker some kind of a compromise, even with Republicans, to get it through the Senate. And apparently some Republicans did vote for it. Now it goes to the House. You have any feel what Boehner may do with this thing?
Well, there were 10 Republicans yesterday that voted for this thing, Perry, which is a great disappointment because it's contrary to the platform that the Republican Party has adopted as its official position. And I was also very disappointed that a lot of our conservative champions did not speak out against this thing. Ted Cruz did not say a word about this thing. Rand Paul did not say a word about this thing. Mike Lee from Utah did not say a word about this thing. Marco Rubio, all of them were AWOL on this issue, despite the fact that there are some very profound constitutional issues that are involved here. Now, Speaker Boehner has said that he's opposed to this thing, and his reason is that it's going to just spawn a host of lawsuits. And that's right. It's not the worst of the problems as far as we're concerned, but it's definitely a reality, and that's a good reason to be against it. We have enough lawsuits. We're litigious enough as a society. Yeah. We don't need to provide any more excuses for that kind of thing to happen. So Speaker Boehner is concerned about the impact on the business climate and the freedom of people to build the businesses the way they want to build them and according to their values. It's a valid concern. So he said he's opposed to it. And I'm not sure that I've heard him say yet, Perry, that he's not going to bring this to the floor. He has the capacity to keep this thing from even coming to the floor of the House. And that's what we hope he will do, is just not let this thing see the light of day. Let's kill this thing before it gets a chance to breathe again.
What are you telling your audience to do about it?
Well, we sent an action alert out yesterday encouraging people, and we give them a one-button click where they can send an email to Speaker Boehner and to their member of the House of Representatives opposing the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, opposing ENDA. So folks in your listening audience, Perry, could go to afa.net. In the upper right-hand part of our homepage, there's a button they can click on for action alerts. They can download this one click. They can send a letter to Speaker Boehner and to their representative. The software will even identify your representative. So it's one letter. It's already pre-written. You can put your own title in it and send it off and make your voice heard. And this is very, very important. We're concerned about it here at AFA because there's no protection in this legislation for an organization like the American Family Association. And we think that it's not, in fact, it's already happening where gay activist groups will actually send somebody into a pro-family organization to apply for a job, with the intent that that person will be denied the job, and then they can sue them. It's already happened to ExxonMobil. No reason why it wouldn't happen to KDove or happen to the American Family Association.
You know, it's so amazing, Bryan. 1 to 3%, depending on the polls you see, of our population is changing the entire culture over these issues, these sexual orientation issues. It's just amazing that this small group has changed everything in this country. I mean, look what Governor Brown has done in California with some of his legislation. If a kid just feels like he's going to want to be a girl today, he can go to the female bathroom. I mean, how crazy is that?
Well, and they've made it illegal in California if you have a teenager who is struggling with unwanted same-sex attractions. He doesn't want to indulge in those attractions. He wants to deal with that. He wants to get past that. That's now against the law in California to give that teenager any kind of help. A parent cannot seek that kind of help for a teenager. So, you know, last thing we need to do is make this whole problem with sexual behavior worse and sexual values worse by passing the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. That'll just compound everybody's problems.
Wow. All right. Well, what do you see coming at us next, Bryan? You're kind of a hawk on this. What's some of your other concerns out there?
Well, I think this ENDA thing is a pretty big thing. We need to deal with this. We need to do everything in our power to stop this thing, to keep it from, you know, from getting any life. And one thing that people don't realize about this, let's say a Christian employer is okay with hiring homosexuals, and you know, we're not saying there ought to be a law that prohibits people from hiring anybody they want, but if you had employees in a workplace, in a work environment, who simply said something that was critical of the normalization of homosexual behavior, then a gay employee, based on this bill, could take the employer into court because you have allowed a hostile work environment to be created under your control. I can't work there. It's hostile to my identity, and so you could be sued. So it's an extremely dangerous problem. You know, just to go back to that ExxonMobil thing, just to illustrate that very quickly, ExxonMobil is one of the few Fortune 500 companies that does not have special protections on the basis of sexual orientation in their personnel policies. Their shareholders voted 81 to 19 last spring. We don't want to go that route. Now, they've become the target of homosexual activist groups. There's a group called Freedom to Work. It's a gay activist group. This summer, they actually sent 2 resumes. They're fictitious resumes. There's no real person behind these resumes, so it was a scam that they were playing on ExxonMobil. Candidate A, applicant A, very accomplished, high education, a lot of achievements, and was also an admitted lesbian, an out lesbian. Applicant B did not have as stellar a resume, but apparently was, according to the resume, was a heterosexual. They submitted these applications to ExxonMobil. Candidate B, the one who was a heterosexual, got a call back from ExxonMobil. Applicant A, with a stellar resume, did not. And ExxonMobil has been taken to court because they wouldn't follow up with somebody who didn't even exist. So that just shows you the kind of examples of the kind of legal subterfuge, the legal attacks now that every pro-family group and every values-driven group is going to be exposed to. So this is, this is a huge issue.
Wow.
And I think obviously people are talking about Obamacare. That's an issue that's a long way from being resolved. I think there's still going to be a push to try to grant amnesty.
Yeah.
We're personally opposed to that because we believe it rewards law breaking and it weakens the fabric of our culture. They're going to try to push that thing through. So those are a couple of issues that we need to keep our eyes on. There's a lot of legal activity in states to try to get courts to overturn state marriage amendments. That's very, very dangerous. So we got to keep an eye on that.
Well, Bryan, you're an inspiration and delight. Thank you, my friend, for your hard work. Keep up the good work, and check out his program, Focal Point, on the AFA Radio Network, and go to afa.net. There is a resource for you. Click on all kinds of things there. A lot of resources there available to you, and support them as well. Thanks, my friend. Look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you, Perry. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
God bless. All right, we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. You know, compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Well, coming up next, I had the opportunity to talk to Susan Allen. She's the former First Lady of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And fortunately, in days gone past, I had the opportunity to be with her husband on a couple occasions, Governor Allen. Well, she authored a book, The Remarkable Ronald Reagan. And what's interesting about this book, it's a children's book. And some of the things that children can learn from our former president. So join me now as we talk to Susan and about her children's book, The Remarkable Ronald Reagan. Well, today we have a very special guest, former First Lady of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have with us Susan Allen, and she's authored a book I think that you're going to want to get for your home. And we are excited to talk about it, The Remarkable Ronald Reagan, Cowboy and Commander-in-Chief. And Susan, thank you so much for letting us have some of your time and for authoring the book. What inspired you to do this?
Thank you so much, Perry. Well, gosh, what an exciting time to be able to talk about Ronald Reagan and to make sure that elementary age children understand his life and his legacy. I think it's more important today than ever before. We live in a time when young people communicate with tweets and snaps and little quick sound bites on their electronic devices. Ronald Reagan was the great communicator, and he became so by being an avid reader and by working very hard to make sure that he could convey his message to others, to unite them behind him when he ran for office. So his life story is really a compelling story, but you can learn so many lessons about so many other things.
All right, now this is a children's book, and it's illustrated by Leslie Harrington, and we have a picture up on the screen there, so it is written for children, and it's available in the bookstores now, Susan?
It is on Amazon.com or in bookstores, but I do hope people will find The Remarkable Ronald Reagan to put in their home library or donate it to a school or public library.
Yeah, you bet. Well, listen, tell us about your own personal relationship with Ronald Reagan.
Well, he was a friend of the Allen family that I married into, actually. My late father-in-law was an NFL coach with the LA Rams when Ronald Reagan was governor, and Reagan would show up at practices. And that really impressed the Allen family, that he didn't come just to sit in the games, in the box, but he would actually come and watch practice. So around that time, in '76, my husband, George Allen, was graduating from school in Virginia, and Ronald Reagan called him and asked him to run Young Virginians for Reagan. My husband had never been involved in organized politics, but was so inspired by Reagan as governor of California, watching what he did, how he kept his promises, and what he did to inspire other people. So my husband helped him in '76, and then my husband's career took off after that as well.
Well, he did, and he went on to become governor of the Commonwealth, and that's just wonderful. Well, listen, of all the people you have selected Ronald Reagan. He is very unique in so many ways. What are you trying to have young people get from this man's life?
I love his all-American story. He started out with very humble beginnings. In Illinois, his mother would help other people who were living in very difficult times. She would bring guests to their home, feed them, let them stay overnight. And I think Ronald Reagan really learned compassion as a young boy, following his mother's footsteps and watching what she did to help take care of others. He had a lot of dreams, though. He went on to be a lifeguard, a radio announcer, an actor. He was in 53 films. And as he worked very hard at all of these other dreams, one thing led to another, and people asked him to run for governor in California. He did such a good job there that, of course, there came this call for him to run for president of the United States. So his life story is really an incredible story. And what we did with the book was we had the children's version of his life story. We point out a lot of important things that happened during his time as president, including telling Gorbachev to tear down the wall, the blow-up of the Challenger, the attempted assassination. But in the back of this book, we also put in facts and figures, highlights, quotes, and copies of letters that he wrote to children. He was a prolific writer. So I think the book is excellent for adults to read so they can remember why Ronald Reagan was so well loved, and they can share their own stories with children. Children will enjoy this book because it's a great book report book. There's a great story there, and then all the facts in the back make it a good resource book. No question about it. I've really enjoyed thumbing through it quickly. You know what's interesting is it's proof that something good can come out of Hollywood. Absolutely.
And secondly is that he was obviously known as the great communicator. I want you to comment on that. And yet he had a eyesight problem in reading, and so, but he was able to communicate with such passion. It was a unique gift.
He was an avid reader, as many people were in his day, but they say even on a movie set, he could be found backstage reading books. And that's really the start to great communication, is being a great reader. So I encourage young people to read as much as possible. Using their electronic devices is great. It's all well and good. You can get a lot of information there, but there's nothing like reading a book. And Ronald Reagan went on to give wonderful speeches, and he saw that he could motivate people. And so when he had ideas about lifting America up, about making sure that we all had pride in America again, he was able to unite the country with those thoughts and impressions by being an optimist. Another great quality to have as a human being, no matter what your purpose or calling in life is, to be optimistic about it every single day. Ronald Reagan led by example, and I think he was really one of the greatest leaders of our country, not just helping people here in America, but in fact people around the world. You can still talk to people today who say Ronald Reagan deserves all the credit for being their voice while they were held behind the Iron Curtain or in oppressed lands elsewhere. So Ronald Reagan did, in fact, change the world.
No question about it. How did his faith play into his leadership role?
Faith was an important part of Ronald Reagan's life. His mother made sure that he and his brother went to church with her every Sunday. Again, she was a very compassionate person and lived out her faith by taking in others who were less fortunate. Ronald Reagan often would write scripture in the margins of his speeches. He would sometimes quote scripture. He didn't have any fear in mentioning God or his faith. And in fact, when the Challenger exploded and he gave this wonderful talk on television that evening to the American people to try to calm them and say, we can't really understand how this could happen, why it would happen, but we know that these astronauts have now touched the face of God. It was his way of comforting the nation at a very difficult time. Mm-hmm. After the attempted assassination, he also felt a renewed surgence in what he needed to do with his life. He felt like God had spared him, and that he needed to get out there and work double time to make things happen so that America would be strong and would be seen as, from everybody else around the world, as the greatest nation on earth.
You know, he actually really put meaning behind the phrase, the art of compromise, because he was able to use that to advance his agenda.
He was, and the other thing I think very important about a great leader is that they can put their differences aside with a fellow human being and still remain friends. I think it's interesting that 26 years ago, he went over and told Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down this wall. Something very brave and something very brazen, and we have a picture of that in the book. And yet, later on, he invited Gorbachev to come and visit him at his ranch. It was another dream come true in Reagan's life. After 8 years in the governor's mansion in California, he bought a ranch where he could ride horses every day. And he invited family and friends there. He invited Gorby there. And I think that was very telling of the type of man that he was. While he did not agree with communism and what it did to people, he did find that being warm and open with Gorby probably helped the relations between the U.S. and Russia. And so I think there's a tall man behind somebody who can do that. It's a very, very good quality to have.
So of all the things when you did the research for the book, what are some of the facts that moved you the most?
Well, Reagan's story as a young man is very interesting. We don't always know a lot about how people are raised and the influences in their life. I think it's funny that Reagan was a lifeguard. He was very athletic, not necessarily a star athlete, but he did try everything. He was a good swimmer, and he saved 77 lives in the Rock River. And we know that because he kept notches on a stick so that he could record each time he pulled somebody out of the river.
Wow.
He was nervous about being an actor. He really didn't want to show everybody, hey, this is my mission, this is my dream, because he was afraid he'd be laughed at. But a friend gave him confidence when he was out in California. He went and tried out, and 53 films later, and helping during World War II, making training films, Reagan really was a movie star.
No question about that. Wow. Well, this is a fascinating book. It's called The Remarkable Ronald Reagan, Cowboy and Commander-in-Chief. Illustrations by Leslie Harrington, of course, authored by Susan Allen. And let me encourage you to check it out and get a copy of it. And as Susan has said, you know, get it, put it in your home library or put it in the school library. There's so much to be learned from him. You know, one of my one of my bucket list things, I guess you could say, is I still want to go down. I haven't been to his library yet, but I want to go visit. Have you been there?
Yes, it is interesting. And of course, Young America's Foundation operates the Reagan Ranch. Mrs. Reagan agreed to sell it to Young America's Foundation because they are really in charge of carrying on Ronald Reagan's legacy, teaching young people. They have seminars for high school and college age children, but really nothing was being done for the elementary age group. And so Young America's Foundation has also partnered with this book. And they can take you to the ranch for a private tour. They have a Reagan Center in Santa Barbara where they have many artifacts from Ronald Reagan from the ranch. And that's another fascinating place to go.
All right. And lastly, Susan, he seemed to have an extra measure of perseverance. I don't know where that came from, maybe from his mother, but he just kept moving forward all the time and doing good things.
It's true. You know, he ran for president in 1976 and failed and came back and did beautifully when he ran in 1980, won the nomination, and went on to serve 2 terms as president. It takes a special person to be able to persevere through that. It's not easy to campaign. It's certainly not easy to run for president of the United States. But when I met Ronald Reagan in 1987, I loved the fact that he could put everybody at ease. He was so kind, such a gentleman, but he had this great, strong compass internally. And I think that guided him well throughout his life. And he really was a remarkable man.
Well, thank you for your time, Susan, and thank you for what you're doing. I don't know if you're going to do a sequel to this or do an adult book about Ronald Reagan, but I think it's wonderful that you have done this and illustrated it the way you have for young people, because it is a legacy that needs to live on.
That's true, and thank you so much, and I hope all of our listeners will check out The Remarkable Ronald Reagan.
Okay, check it out in the bookstores. Coming up next, Amir George is going to be with us. He's an international columnist and college professor, but he's authored a book that I think you're going to find to be pretty fascinating, Liberating Iraq. We're going to talk to him about that coming up in just a minute.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Okay, we're back, and our special guest is Amir George. He's an international columnist and college professor, and he's authored a book that is pretty fascinating, Liberating Iraq, the untold story of Iraq's Assyrian Christians. There's a picture of it there on the screen for those watching on theDove TV, and let me encourage you to check it out at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, online. And Amir, are we Skyping you in from a bunker in Japan?
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, nice to have you. First of all, on my wife's side of the family, they were Assyrian Christians.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. From one undisclosed location to another.
There we go. There we go. Well, what provoked you to write this book?
Well, I think a big part of it was, for those, probably a lot of your viewers as well, most people don't realize that 2.5 million Americans served in Iraq at one point or another. And for those of us that were there, we all kind of waited for someone to tell the story, and they never did. And that's probably what was the original genesis for it. But the other part was, and the title of the book, which is Liberating Iraq, is a kind of a play on words, because we, you know, the Liberating Iraq that everybody knows about is kind of looked on as a failure, and we bungled it, and we pulled out too early, and it's just one big mess, right?
Right.
But there was a second liberation, and that was 2.5 million Americans, mostly young kids. Just, you know, tears come, you know, when you start to think of just the different examples of what they were doing. But they fanned out over a country that had been destroyed. Right. By 40 years of Saddam's terror, and they just loved these people back. And that second liberation was a resounding success. So we really wrote the book, first of all, to say thank you to the families of the 4,888 who lost their lives. Over 32,000 were injured. And we're working to present a book to each of those families, but also to hear from the 2.5 million who served with all their stories of what did happen that nobody seems to have heard about.
Beautifully said, and especially on the eve of Veterans Day coming up the first of the week. Let me ask you this, Amir, tell us, just describe from your perspective, who is the Assyrian Christian?
Well, this is another thing that people probably don't realize, but Iraq was originally the nation of Assyria, which was the first Christian nation, the first nation to accept the gospel and become a Christian nation. And it was from Iraq, essentially, that missionaries went throughout the world. The gospel was first preached to China, to most of Asia, to Europe, from those Assyrian Christians. And it's an interesting turn of events that most of us at some point in time can point to our faith coming from the Assyrians, and now history is reversed and they're the ones that need help. It's a very interesting historic as well as a spiritual journey.
So during the Iraqi war, how were the Assyrian Christians liberated? I mean, what happened to them as a result of Saddam Hussein being taken out? Even though we bundled the war at the end, how are they liberated?
Yeah, and that's kind of a tough one. You know, it's the catch-22 where I was there under Saddam's time. It was hell. You know, if the phone rang, the whole family went into a panic. He took a taxi home. You know, who was the driver? You know, what did you say to them? And people it was just a living hell. Nearly 1 million people lost their lives. And I think my uncle, I think we mentioned in the book, but one of my uncles kept saying, you know, he said, my grandson gets up every morning, goes to school, studies about Saddam Hussein. He says, you know, I would be happy if you know, whatever it took to get rid of him. There were 2 TV channels, Saddam 1 and Saddam 2. You know, you woke up in the morning and went to bed at night and everything was Saddam. He was on the money, he was a statue outside, he was on TV. And for the Christians, it was a very difficult situation as well. They were allowed freedom within the church itself, but from then on out, anything that they did that was even the slightest bit, you know, difficult for the government, they would be hauled off. People would just disappear. So now, as difficult as things are, and nobody is saying that they're not, freedom is an incredible thing. And we had an interesting conversation, I remember one day, where a bunch of people were together and everyone was complaining. You know, they were complaining about the traffic. You know, it takes an hour to go what used to take 10 minutes. Right. And I remember looking around and I said, guys, that's what happens when freedom comes. Did you even have a car before? So times are tough, especially for the Christians, because they've had many escape to Syria, to Egypt and other areas, and then, you know, especially those in Syria are in a difficult position. But going forward, in spite of the difficulties, freedom is a tremendous difference.
Right. You write in the book about weapons of mass destruction, and obviously under Saddam Hussein's dictatorial rule, they were used, but when we got in there, they couldn't be found. What's your take on all that?
Well, rather than my take, there was a press conference where the Iraqi foreign minister was speaking, and I'll never forget that. It was in the book, I think. After he finishes, they take time for questions, and a reporter went up to the mic, and as we used to hear, it just became almost routine. He opened his question by saying to the foreign minister of Iraq, he said, first of all, I would like to apologize to you on behalf of my country for invading without reason and destroying your country. And he went on, and suddenly in the middle of his question, the Iraqi foreign minister slammed his hand on the podium, and he said, sit down. And he said, invading? He said, how can you use a word like that? He said, my people were liberated from a monster who had killed over 1 million of our people, destroyed our nation, And then he went on to say, and weapons? He said, which ones would you like me to describe? The ones that were driven into the desert across the border into Syria, or the ones that had been flown into Iran? So the situation was apparently, and this is, you know, obviously a catch-22 situation, but
right.
It seems to be that they were a lot of things were discovered, but they were people forget that previously Iraq was an ally of the West against Iran,
Right.
and a lot of things were discovered, and a lot of those things were things that had been gotten from the West. So it was a catch-22 to find them.
Was the liberation of Kurdistan somewhat a hope for the Assyrian Christians trapped inside Iraq?
Yes, Iraq is essentially 4 countries. Some people might remember the Biden plan. That time Senator Biden, now Vice President Biden, put together a plan essentially to allow Iraq to fall into its 4 main groups. You know, in the south you have Shiistan, Sunnistan, Kurdistan, and then you have Assyria. So the one area of Iraq that is incredibly safe is in fact Kurdistan. But and this is if there's a good news through this all, is that the Iraqi government, the regional governments, everybody essentially has agreed that the Assyrians should be given a province of their own. And so for those people that are praying and concerned about the Christians in Iraq as well as the Middle East, the solution is an area. I did an interview with a Jewish rabbi a while back, and I'll never forget what he said. He put it in a very easy to understand way. He said, I don't understand the Christians. He said, they support Israel, they love Israel so much, which we are happy for. He said, but we have our own land. He said, we have our own government, we have our own army. He said, but the Christians of the Middle East have no government, they have no land, they have no army, they have nobody to protect them. And he said the best way that Christians can help Israel is to help their fellow Christians in the Middle East who suffer so terribly. And I think that's an interesting point. But in Iraq, even the current prime minister, as well as virtually every government official, has agreed that the Assyrian Christians should be allowed to have a province of their own. And if we can accomplish that, then they'll be able to come back. They don't have to escape to Syria and other countries. So that's really the long-term goal that people that are watching could be very supportive of.
All right, the book is entitled Liberating Iraq, The Untold Story of Iraq's Assyrian Christians by Amir George, and let me encourage you to check it out. There's a picture of it there on the screen, and you may want to get this at the bookstores. I got about a minute left, Amir. Let me ask you this. Are you pretty much traveling and lecturing on this topic?
Well, right now we're working very hard to find, if someone's watching today and you have a family member that gave their life in Iraq, or you served in Iraq and you've been injured, we're trying to get a book to you. We'd like to present a book to each of those families.
Okay.
And also, if you're watching and you served in Iraq, we're compiling a second book on all those experiences. So we'd love to hear from the audience, and especially from those that lost a family member, because we want to say thank you.
How do they contact you?
They can go to liberatingiraq.com,
okay,
and they can sign up to receive a book or to tell their story. And thank you for having us.
Oh, wait, before I let you go, I got 30 seconds. Do you still have family in Iraq?
Absolutely, and we talk to them all the time. It's the best of times and it's the worst of times.
I can imagine. Amir, thank you. You're in our prayers. Thanks. Keep up the good work. Let's get together soon.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Again, the book is entitled The Untold Story of Iraq, Assyrian Christians, Liberating Iraq, The Untold Story of Iraq's Assyrian Christians. Check it out at the bookstores. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Jim and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, theDove.us.